Welcome to Parenting Solutions for Teen and Preteen Education and Behavior, the show for parents who want real root cause solutions for learning, stress, and behavior at home and at school. Hosted by educators Mike Tyler and myself, Ryan Kimball, each episode gives you practical tools you can use right away to get results. Before we dive in, grab our free ebooks, the Parent's Survival Guide, and the Good Choices booklet. Use the click here link right in the show notes. Okay, let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Parenting Solutions for Teen and Preteen Education and Behavior podcast. Today, Mike and I are going to be going over why your kid gets sick and how to address it as it relates to study, to education. And this is a very interesting topic that we've been wanting to talk about for a while because it's not something that's generally known out there and how the two relate or even that they do relate. So we'll give you some information about it. And then at the end, of course, practical ways to apply this with your child. So why don't you kick us off, Mike, and tell us about why kids get sick, how this relates to study and education.
Sure. Let's just clear the air on this point of like the kids can be malnourished or otherwise, being fed a bunch of garbage and they're going to get sick that way. Okay. But most of our listeners already have, jumped over that hurdle or learned on that subject. Most of our listeners are the type of parents who are doing the best for their kids. They've already researched what the best stuff is to feed their kids and so forth. But we got to take it a step further, and the parents want to take it a step further and do everything that they can to ensure their child's success, which brings us to the field of education. So why, when you send your kid to school, do they come back sick? Or why do they wake up in the morning and that's when you find out they're sick and they don't want to go to school? They could be fibbing. But if they're fibbing about being sick, it's probably because they succeeded in staying home from school some earlier time and it worked, right? But in actual fact, there was an earlier time when they were sick and they stayed home from school. Now this becomes useful. That's a whole mechanism there, but we're backing it up to like the root cause. Why would going to school and studying stuff cause the child to feel sick, to have headaches, upset stomach, like physically feel ill? Well, it's really as simple as this. You can produce the same phenomenon by putting your kid on a merry-go-round, right? And having them get dizzy, okay? Getting dizzy physically can cause you to get ill. You could make somebody throw up, even vomit, as get them dizzy enough, and they're so disoriented, the body just sort of goes haywire. Well, in school, unfortunately, most schools, in America, are giving the kids too much information and not enough to do. Okay. And when you overbalance too much information, even if the child understands it, this is not the same territory as we cover often on the subject of being confused. No, they could be right in there batting, rolling up their sleeves, really studying this material, but it's just too much information and they're not being allowed to actually interact with the physical universe and do things. Okay. And that imbalance causes them to feel dizzy or spinny, causes them to feel ill at the stomach. Headaches get produced this way, okay? People sometimes will say they get headaches from reading too much. Well, okay, you could, even if you're looking up all your words, making sure you understand everything well, so forth and so on, at some point, reading about how to play kickball does not replace going out at recess or in a structured educational program and being taught how to play kickball out there in the parking lot or the field or whatever, right? So when they're studying and being lectured at or made to read at length about things that they should be learning and practicing, you're going to get this phenomenon. They feel ill, they get headaches, sick to their stomach, etc. And then they bow out. I mean, they don't want to feel that way, so they have an aversion to studying.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I know that I've seen this phenomena myself. I actually thought of this as you were talking. It's one of my first experiences with really experiencing how using some of the tools that I've learned over the years, and you've helped me learn much more about. Was getting a splitting headache when cramming for something and trying to really study and just get it all down so I could get through that test that was coming up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And somebody who knew about what you just talked about, the how to balance the doing with the information, helped me get through that, and I felt so much better afterwards. So I can attest to that one personally. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So tell us about your experience with seeing this phenomena in students that you've helped, and how it worked, and get an example that people can relate to.
Well, sure. I remember a particular young man that I was working with. He was taking a life skills class with me on the weekend, but he was still in school. And I forget whether he was like a senior in high school or maybe it was first year of college or something like this. And he came in on a Saturday morning into this life skills classroom, and he had a splitting headache. He just looked terrible. But he showed up, right? He showed up for class, um, and but he had this splitting headache. So I just started asking him, well, what are you studying about? And he was telling me about different subjects he's studying. He landed on geometry. I go, oh, well, what were you going over, yesterday in geometry class? He goes, well, I learned about a great circle, right? Which is a technical thing. It's a specific thing in the physical universe, and something that you learn about in geometry. And as we've covered in another episode, I think we covered the fact that geometry means literally the metry part is measuring, and geo is, of course, Earth. It stands for Earth, from which we get geography and all those other words, right? So measuring the Earth. Well, a great circle is the largest circle that you can get when you, and let's I could use more technical terms, but if you cut an orange in half, okay, you can cut a little slice off the side, or you can go straight through the center, okay, and any plane or flat surface that goes straight through the center of a sphere is going to produce the largest circle that you can get if you're cutting that sphere. Okay, and so they have a special name for it, for whatever reason, and they call it a great circle. It's the great circle. Okay, so the equator would be a great circle on the Earth's. It's obviously an imaginary line, right? But it's a line, and it goes around, and it's not just intersecting with the North Pole or the South Pole, right? Which would produce a very much smaller circle. Okay. So he tells me about this. We land on this thing. I sort of fished around, and because I know this study technology, I was able to kind of land on this one thing, and I was like, oh, okay. So come on over here, and I took him over here into a little adjoining room where we had some clay, and he was my only student that particular morning, Saturday morning. So I took him over here, and I had him make a nice big 4 or 5 inch ball of clay, and then I had him cutting it and chopping it in half and chopping other circles and comparing and stuff. And it didn't take very long before he's like, whoa. He goes, my headache is completely gone. He was like, what did you do to me? It's just, all I had to do was just get him to look at a physical object and connect this information that he was being given that he understood well. He spit it out. He told me exactly what a great circle was, but he didn't have enough interaction with a physical object to really assign that information that's in his head to something in front of him. And when we balanced that out, the headache just completely blew away.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, that's what I was saying. I can totally relate to that. When that occurred for me, something very similar, I was like, what did you just do to me? Like, how do I feel better? I haven't taken anything that's supposed to make me feel better. And I had some nausea going on with it at the time, and with the headache, I was like, okay, I just need to go home and lie down in a dark room. And then you do this remedy, and it's like, it's a bit magical when you first experience it, but then it becomes normal over the years.
That's right. If it's coming from the area of study, it's curable with the subject of study, because you do not have to resort to other unusual solutions. You don't need painkillers. You don't need to change the kid's diet. That might be its own subject, right? But if it's coming from study, we can solve it with study.
Exactly. Yeah, and of course that's important to note. Not everyone who has a headache or sick to their stomach is going to respond to this, because there are other sources for these things, of course. But speaking of that, and how someone can like spot this phenomena, you mentioned that because of your knowledge of and ability to apply the technology of study, you were able to narrow this down for that young man you were talking about. How would somebody, maybe their child comes home and is feeling this way, how would they narrow that down? What are some approaches to that?
Sure. So obviously, being aware of the potential problem is one thing, because you could start questioning the child about, like, well, I mean, there could be these other things involved. Maybe they, borrowed or stole some Twinkies in the lunchroom or something, and they made themselves sick that way. I mean, anything could happen. It's grade school, right? Or maybe junior high school. Even more can happen. Even much worse, right? Okay, if they're hungover, okay, slicing a ball of clay in half is not going to cure their headache and nausea. That's not going to happen. Okay, right? Right. But hopefully that's like junior high school, not elementary school, right? Right. But no, if just knowing that there could be a connection, and you start tracing it down. Well, what are you studying? What's going on? What often the kids, if they're confused, they don't even know what they're studying in school. But this particular problem of having physical reactions to study is not one of being confused or blank or forgetting things. They should be able to spot it pretty easily. Like, well, we were going over this, that, and the other thing. And it's that attempt to really get it pictured in their mind, and the sort of effort that they're putting into it that sort of ends up causing those internal problems, the headache, the stomach ache, the nausea. If you're just blank because you didn't understand something, you're just blank. There's no real adverse physical reaction other than just staring at the wall or something, right? But these deep down physical reactions are always because of too much information, not enough doing. And it just takes a little careful questioning about what's going on, what's being studied. And then, of course, the remedy is to supply either the thing that's being studied about, okay, the bicycle, the automobile, okay, what are they studying about? Baseball, kickball. They're studying about something. If it's dance or theater, well, let's get up on stage. Let's create a stage. Let's get the kitchen table out and make that a stage, or whatever. Let's do something effective in the direction of putting into the physical universe what they're being taught in school. And sometimes that's getting the actual physical object that's being studied about. Sometimes it's supplying some type of reasonable substitute, okay, and getting things that represent that thing, or making small miniatures of that thing, which then if they're manipulating various things in front of them, they're bigger than it. They can kind of be in control of it. And enough of that is going to blow the headache, get rid of the nausea, get them settled down and stable and not feeling dizzy anymore, if that's what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's so significant, at least it was for me, to notice, like you said at the beginning, it's not something that they are necessarily confused about, that they're missing this balance of doing to the theory of it, right? Because I used to have this misconception, and it was, somebody helped me figure it out. Maybe it was you, I don't remember. That it had to be something you were confused about, that you didn't have balance with significance versus doing, like the words and whatnot about it versus experiencing it or whatever. So I think that is important to make a note of, that the child may appear to totally get his studies, be getting good grades, and still have this imbalance going on. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. You have to differentiate between various problems that come up with study, and we have this book for those that are interested, and we'll make this available. The learning book is your most elementary approach to learning the language that we're talking about, and it identifies 3 very specific barriers to study, and this overbalance of information and not enough contact with physical objects or things with mass, that's its own specific thing. It has its own remedies. Okay, you cannot fix somebody's headache if it came from the subject of study by looking things up in the dictionary and clarifying words. You're just going to kill the kid, or the adult for that matter. Anybody who tries to take this approach. The dictionary is not going to solve this problem. And I'm the big proponent of dictionaries and derivation books and all that stuff. But that's not the problem. Okay, we don't need more information. We don't need more clarification. What we need is something to look at, something to handle in the physical universe. Okay, let's not endlessly teach the kid the theory of good manners. Okay, let's have him practice introducing his friend to another friend. Let's have him do things out in the world. Okay, let him help set the table, him or her. Right? It's like any concept that's trying to be taught to the child, or any student of any age, needs to be related to the physical world, and all these physical manifestations, most of them, when it comes from studying, is this imbalance of information to physical mass. So there it is.
Excellent. Okay, great. And what advice would you give, just to kind of use this to wrap things up, to a parent who's trying to do this with a child, and maybe there's some resistance because the kid doesn't feel good and it's not really real to them, that their headache might be, or their stomach ache might be from this, what we're talking about right now?
Sure.
What's your approach to that?
Well, nobody wants to be made to feel like they did something wrong. In fact, they did not do anything wrong. Okay. So it's the same type of approach that you would expect when a child is confused or ill. Okay. Not to be sympathetic, particularly, not overly sympathetic and approaching it like, oh, careful and all that, but just, that if your child needs to be fed and put to bed because they're getting hostile, they're getting this and that or whatever. And a lot of parents, they know this intuitively. It just goes, let's feed the kid, put him to bed. Okay, boom. That's it. That's if it works, if that's a remedy, that's something that's that's parents' intuition, or probably maybe they were taught that by their own parents. Okay, but feeding the kid, putting him to bed. Okay, for certain situations that works. And you don't do it by sympathizing. You don't do it by explaining. You just feed the kid, put them to bed. They wake up, they're doing better. Okay. If it's coming up that they're getting headaches, they've got headaches, you've already check marked mentally, or possibly you have a checklist. The parent has a checklist of things that it could be. They're not eating a bunch of Twinkies or other sugar products. They're not drinking, pops all day long, type of thing. All right, they've got good nutrition, good food. Okay, sensible eating is going on. If you've isolated the fact that it does come from school, then it's just like roll up your sleeves. Let's find out, what are they studying about. Okay, it has to just be done in an interested fashion, and curiosity, your own curiosity about, like, well, I mean, you have to try it. You really have to just be willing to try this. You have to be willing to. You don't have to believe that this is true. Okay, and you won't necessarily believe it's true until you see it with your own eyes. So you observe it for yourself. You have to be willing to learn that this possibly could work. Okay, that's probably a real important step, is for the parent to just be willing to find out, could this possibly work? It's better than drugging your kid, right? Well, they don't feel good, so let's give them like 14 spoons of that stuff that we got from the store, or whatever. It's like, no, let's just see if maybe we could do something effective by finding out what they're studying, and then supplying some stuff for them to look at and physically handle. And maybe by physically handle, it could be stuff that they could stomp on all over the floor, right, in the kitchen. I mean, use your imagination. But kicking some books around the kitchen, a pile of books around the kitchen floor, great, yay! Kick him some more. I mean, you could literally like blow the kid's headache like in 10 minutes or a half an hour of just having kick. They hate school. It makes them feel bad and stuff. Bring all your books down here. Let's kick them around the kitchen for a while, right? Okay, now that we've done that, your headache's gone and you're feeling better. Okay, now let's get in there and find out if there was something you didn't understand. That would be let's kill two birds with one stone, But now you've got to be willing to find out, could this possibly work? Can we get some interaction with the physical universe, and make these physical manifestations disappear?
Love it. So simple, very workable, I can attest to as well. So another great topic. Thank you, Mike, for sharing your wisdom and experience on that. And for everybody listening, thank you for listening. Stay tuned for another episode coming up next week. Thanks for listening to Parenting Solutions for Teen and Preteen Education and Behavior today. If today's episode helped you or resonated with you, please share it with a parent who needs to hear it. And don't forget, you can download our free ebooks, The Parent's Survival Guide and the Good Choices booklet. Just use the click here link in the show notes. We'll see you in the next episode.